I left the ethanol 96% soaking the root bark for an hour. It had maybe 5 grams or so of lye with it. And then I filtered off the alcohol, which should contain a majority of the alkaloid. Hopefully this material is better than my previous attempts. For some reason I can only find outer root bark and not inner root bark. I assume it's just that it's exported a majority of the time since there's a higher price in other countries. But in any case, this is the 1 hour pull of the ethanol. I used 150 milligrams or 150 milliliters. I got back 100 milliliters. I'll let this evaporate completely and do a traditional pull with that. So to test, I'll be adding slowly approximately 100 milliliters of a salt brine. It's just water with saturated salt. You can see there's some solid salt on the bottom. And I'll be adding this in small amounts, maybe 2 milliliters at a time. And I'll just place it slowly, and once I get near the 50-50 mark, I should start to see some crystals or precipitate forming. Hopefully with a slower addition I can get larger crystals and not that micro or nano crystallization that I got with just dumping in the solution. So yeah, I'll apply it slowly. I won't be stirring. I'll allow it as slowly as possible so that it helps induce larger crystallization. And if I use the same calculation I got from my previous yields from root bark that I got from the store, I should get around 100 to 200 milliliters or milligrams of the salt. I could get as low as 100 milligrams in the worst case scenario. This is my first attempt using the anti-solvent precipitation method to drop the solubility of the NN salt. And I did a test run using 50 grams of the bark material. I added lye and a minimal amount of, I added around 5 grams of lye, which is probably excessive, and 150 milliliters of ethanol, 96%. I let that dissolve, and then I allowed it to soak for an hour. And after that hour, I filtered and placed it into this beaker. I ended up with 100 milliliters of ethanol with this orangish red tint, and I proceeded to add the saturated brine solution, just a salt solution, and I added it slowly. It didn't make a difference. I kept adding and adding. There was a point, there was a division. There was 2 layers basically, and the bottom layer, it had some crystalline structures to it, but I think that was just the salt. Since the solubility was dropping a bit, I believe it was just salt. And I left it covered overnight. It didn't work out, nothing happened, so I added just the rest of the salt brine, so it was around 50-50 ethanol to the salt brine solution. After the salt brine solution, there was this noticeable bubbling and a very fine precipitate formed. Now it's finally settled. There you can see there's a precipitate. Now whether this is the compound that I want or not, I have no idea yet, but I do assume that it's something interesting. So here I'll be filtering off and collecting the precipitate, and I'll try to recrystallize that. Since I only did a 1 hour soak of the bark material, I just added a few grams of lye and water. I added 250 milliliters of water, and I'll leave this soaking for maybe a week, and I'll try pulling with the traditional heptane, hexane, naphtha to see how much remains in the bark. So unfortunately, I don't have access to premium root bark. From at least I can't find it personally online, and it does make sense since there's a higher price in other countries, since you could get a higher premium on your bark material. As a seller, I understand, so that makes sense. But unfortunately, the previous attempts that I did, I only get around maybe 0.2, 0.5% yield, where normally online it's around 1 or 2% yield from bark material. The reason here is because they use a lot of the outer root bark, and it influences the yield. I paid a little bit more since I had a better yield with this supplier. You can see there's some darker root bark, inner root bark, but it's still a low yield in comparison to most. So just an update, I want to give a big shout out to One Atom 12 for his donation. With his donation, I was able to buy some root bark for this experiment, and if this material shows any promise, I'll reattempt it one more time, try to streamline it a bit more, and I'll also try with lime, calcium hydroxide, rather than using lye or sodium hydroxide, since that would be a safer option. But I chose lye just since it's a stronger alkalinizing agent. I chose that just for the first runs. As far as the penetration and getting the alkaloids, the freebase is extremely soluble in ethanol, and it'll have a nice penetration of the bark material as a alkaline ethanol solution. So that shouldn't be an issue. Maybe 1 hour was a bit too quick, but that's fine. This is just a proof of concept. The bark is manually shredded. It's not fine powder. So all of this could play some influence on things. But I did get a precipitate. If it's DNA or some other compound, I have no idea yet. And this, again, like I mentioned, I'm just trying to see if I can recover any more of the compound. I rebasified the brown precipitate. I added more lye to alkalinize it since it was neutral. And then I had a semi-clear solution, and I added salt brine again. And the precipitate is a very nice white color. So in theory, this should be the compound I'm looking for. I'll do more testing soon. I ended up just doing the quicker pour, and I think the best route is to just do recrystallization. So I got a white precipitate when I did the anti-solvent precipitation, and initially I thought I was getting the correct compound, but in isopropanol it's insoluble basically, and regardless of that, it is also a large amount. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to let it soak a little bit longer, and I'll filter it and separate it. I thought initially it could have been salt that precipitated out from being so saturated, but it would have also dissolved in the isopropanol, at least a portion of it. But in any case, if there is any freebase, it'll be in the isopropanol. I will filter this off and evaporate the iso and see if I get any crystals or anything. And my first attempt trying to use the anti-solvent extraction technique, it was a complete fail. I just ended up with salt and more salt. I tried to recover it doing a normal extraction, but I just ended up tossing it since it was too much of a headache. Since my starting material isn't too particularly strong, it would just be a waste of time. I did do a pull on the starting material, and I have some precipitate, which should be the compound I'm after. Judging by the amount that's visible here, the yield is comparable to my previous attempts, and they're very poor starting material. So next time I'll be starting with 100 grams, and I'll do a tea concentrate, and then I'll try to extract from that rather than trying straight to bark. Since the concentration is so low, it won't be worthwhile.